Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of Counseling Conversations, Insight from Greensboro College's Counseling Services. This podcast features discussions and insight from Micah Wyatt, the Director of Counseling Services here at Greensboro College. Micah has a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in both mental and behavioral health, and marriage and family therapy, respectively. He is currently a PhD student in counselor education and supervisor and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. How are you doing today, Micah?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Hope you are back from spring break. It wasn't long enough.
No, it was not.
But we're back. We're working.
So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression, which is a common issue, and not just on our campus, but in higher education in general.
Yeah, it is, and it's one of those things that everybody experiences at some point, right? But we don't necessarily experience it the same way and at the same rate, if you will. Certain situations, different things cause us anxiety and depression. And if we're not able to connect with what those things are, it really has the ability to sit us in those spaces too long that, we actually start to become, the symptoms. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
Then once you get the diagnosis, now I probably need some medicine to help me deal with this.
I know, one of the ones that stuck out to me, what you just said, was situations. Just because in the college level, you have academic pressures, you have peer pressures. If you're an athlete or you play in a musical group or theater, there's pressures there. So what are some of the common challenges students face when it comes to mental health and anxiety, like in a college environment?
So I think, one of the common challenges is just learning how to deal with it. Some students are coming from high school careers where they were the best student, right? Like straight A's, never made a B, and then you get into a college environment where you're not the only good one.
Yeah.
And it can be very anxiety provoking. Like, man, there are people here that are just as good as me now. And it raises the anxiety simply because I have a fear that I'm going to fail. I've never failed before. I don't know what it feels like to get a C or a D or an F. I don't know what that feels like, and I'm afraid of that. And so when we sit in that fear, the anxiety raises, and now the inevitable happens. You get your first failed grade.
Yeah.
And it's like the world is ending.
Yeah, it could be overwhelming. If you, like you said before, all you've experienced has been 3.5, 4 years of just not saying no struggles, but like you've been doing really well, but then to have this, it can be a lot.
Mm-hmm. And it can be a lot to deal with in terms of knowing how to navigate that. How do I shake myself back from that experience? Or from a relational perspective, you're going from being very popular, everybody knowing you, to an environment where not as many people may know you.
Yeah.
Right? Like you may have a smaller group of friends, and that small group of friends may be very specific to a certain interest, right? And so it can be hard. It can be very difficult.
Over the past few years, there's been a lot of conversations about mental health and just bringing these conversations to the forefront of like anxiety and depression. So do you want to maybe talk about some maybe common misconceptions about anxiety and depression?
So great that you ask. I have with me a book called Anxious by an author named Joseph Ledoux. And so in this particular book, he really goes through the brain science of how anxiety is developed. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have around anxiety and depression is that it's genetic, it's innate. You inherited this from someone else. When the reality is most oftentimes you did not. This was created through situations, and your brain has responded in a way that anxiety now sets in. And so in the book, he describes an experiment that was done with mice. And so disclaimer to anybody who's listening, I'm not comparing you to a mouse, all right? This is just for the purposes of explaining what he did. So they took mice and they put them in this glass box, and they put shocking agents on each corner of the box. Every time the mice would go into the box, they would look for cheese or something to eat. They would give them a shock if they hit one of the corners. After enough of that, when the mice were put into the box, they would freeze. They wouldn't do anything. Now anxiety has set in. The fight, flight, or freeze response has set in, right?
Yeah.
So through that, we now know you can actually grow anxiety in a person, right? You can take a person who is not anxious, who has not experienced anxiety, and through situation, you can create anxiety in them. But they wanted to also know if you can undo that. So whenever they would put the mice into the box and they took the shocking agents away, and anytime they would do anything other than freeze, if they moved their tail, if they turn their gaze a different direction, if they move a whisker, they give them a piece of cheese. After a while, those mice would stop freezing and they would begin looking for the cheese again. And so that tells you that as long as I have enough positive reinforcement, I can undo the negative impact of anxiety. But I have to be willing to be intentional about finding those positive reinforcers, right? Yeah. So if you put that in a college context, I failed the test this week, but the 3 previous tests, I got A's. That's one positive reinforcement. I left class and the professor told me, hey, I know this isn't your best work. Take it back, fix it, and I'll give you you can get up to a B.
Yeah.
Positive reinforcement number 2. I take it to my room, do it, bring it back. I actually received the B. I see it on the paper. Positive reinforcement number 3. Enough of that, it starts to diminish the effect of the anxiety on the F you got. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so you can do the same thing in relationship. You can do the same thing in sports. You can do the same thing in any aspect of a college student's life, and you can undo the negative impact of anxiety without the medication.
That's so interesting. I feel like I could just sit in a classroom and hear you lecture for like 50 minutes.
Well, ironically enough, me and AJ were talking about me teaching, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm cut out for it. But maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anxiety, that's a huge misconception, is that it's just in you.
Yeah.
It's not. Small children, when you see them, they do very daring and very, very bold things, jumping off furniture, walking up to random animals and just being, this looks friendly.
Yeah.
Does it? I remember a time my oldest daughter, she was about 2 or 3. I used to go for walks with her, and there was a duck, and she thought it was just friendly. It looks like the ducks on TV, Dad.
Yeah.
Don't go over there messing with that duck now, And so she starts moving toward the duck, like, hey, ducky, ducky.
Yeah.
And the duck hisses at her. And so I go pick her up, like, come on, girl, because you ain't finna get me pecked out here. And so it taught her, like, okay, so maybe I can't just walk up to random animals, but it also created an anxiety that says, I don't want to walk up to no animal now.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to do some things to kind of undo that. But it's a thing that happens. She wasn't born with that in her.
Yeah.
Naturally, she just was like, oh, this is a duck. They look friendly. They're friendly on TV. Should be good.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have that anxiety when you're born. You're groomed into it.
And that's interesting. Like, it's experience, it's environmental, and that's just something that I'm sure like a lot of people didn't know about. I know I myself didn't know about that. So
yeah, I mean, most people don't think about it.
Yeah.
You just wake up one day and you have your first really tough experience and you realize that you're anxious about it. And this is the first time you really sat with it. And so it can be very off-putting.
So going back to like the college space, in terms of like faculty and staff, like how can we play a role in like supporting students when they're maybe feeling depressed or anxious?
I'm just full of the resources today. There is a anxiety workbook. It's a 7-week plan workbook. It's called the Anxiety Workbook by Aaron Koenig. And so it's a good book, and it gives practical steps that you can just give to anybody who is dealing with anxiety. Like, maybe you should try this, right?
Yeah.
Try this, see how it works for you. And on top of that, if you want additional resources, go talk to somebody in our counseling center, right? And so another thing that faculty and staff can do is educate yourselves on what anxiety and depression is for you, right? And then it gives you a better perspective to understand how it manifests itself in other people. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
If I can explain to you how I've experienced it, then I can then understand how you are possibly experiencing it as well. And so it gives me, instead of it being one of those situations that's like you're being over dramatic,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, you're really anxious. You really are dealing with something.
Yeah.
And so my experience with it is this. Maybe this is your experience too. Here's what's helped me, right? And so educating yourself, you can never over-educate yourself about anxiety and how to deal with it. The key to it is once you educate yourself, you actually have to use the education. So do something with it, right? And so faculty and staff can either grab a workbook like this, do some reading up on what anxiety is. Doesn't have to be anything primary source. You can, there's a lot of secondary source information out there that's really, really good, really valuable, and really helpful.
Yeah.
TikTok is not a source at all. Okay. Do some Googles and find some good stuff and really use that to kind of help understand your anxiety and the anxiety of other people.
What advice would you give to students who are experiencing anxiety and depression, but maybe hesitant to speak about it? They don't want to maybe talk about it with like their friends or see a faculty member or a staff member.
Don't think that it's uncommon. A lot of times we can feel like I'm the only person that's dealing with this. I can assure you that you're not. There's that probably everybody around you is dealing with it. And don't be afraid to speak up like, man, this is a really anxious situation. This is really causing me some anxiety, right? And once you're able to really put words to what you feel, it makes it not so mysterious. As long as we're kind of making it mysterious and taking it away from the context of the situation and making it personal, like there's something wrong with me, we don't talk about it because I don't want to be viewed in that light. I don't want to be looked at as a person who needs help because there's something wrong with you. Anxiety does not mean that there's something wrong with you. And so the first step to being willing to speak out and actually go suss out help is becoming comfortable with the idea that this doesn't mean there's something wrong with me.
I know I was just asking about misconceptions, and I mean, that's another one that you were just talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so once we're able to kind of break that barrier, I think it makes it easier for you to go and talk to a therapist, or it makes it easier for you to go talk to a life coach or someone that you have a really close relationship with that you trust with your emotional well-being, and really telling them like, man, this situation is causing me a lot of anxiety. Right. And I'm not really sure where it's coming from. This is the first time that I've really sat with it and really identified it as that, right? Giving it words and giving it some space to be flushed out, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. And so once you do that, then coming to that other person that you're talking to has the responsibility, if you will, of creating empathetic space for you to process what that looks like and not try to fix it. We're not trying to fix you, because to fix you implies that something's wrong with you. You're broken. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the work. So if we demystify it, it becomes easier to talk about, and then becomes easier for us to look, get resources.
I know for my last question, I know you were talking about earlier about like faculty and staff like educating themselves for students and just for, again, general, anyone who's dealing with anxiety or depression. What are some strategies and takeaways you would recommend for like managing it and just actionable steps that someone can take?
Sure. So one of the most prominent tools or resources to use for anxiety is mindfulness or meditation. And so they call it mindfulness because meditation sometimes implies a spiritual nature. And that's not necessarily what I'm implying. We're talking more so about your ability to sit in a quiet space, breathe, really focus your attention on your breathing, and really learn how to control the thoughts that come in and out of your mind, right? And so that mindfulness, that meditative practice of doing that really helps us to lower the physical symptoms, the increased heart rate, difficulty breathing, racing thought, or whatever the case may be. It really helps us to lower those physical responses to anxiety while increasing the ability to identify exactly what it is that caused me the anxiety in the first place. Because sometimes people can feel anxious and not even know why. I don't know where this came from. And sometimes it can come from an experience that you've had previously that we've never really had space to deal with. And so now those emotions are now starting to surface because maybe I was triggered by something. And so mindfulness meditation, progressive relaxation, all the same. Progressive relaxation is a deeper dive into that, right? And so your eyes are closed. You may take yourself to your favorite, vacation location. So if that's at the beach, and so you're within yourself, in your mind, you may even hear the ocean waves. You may hear the birds. You may hear people laughing and just enjoying the beach, and you immerse yourself in that thought while paying attention to your breathing, making sure that you're present with yourself, and identifying when thoughts are coming in. That feels like something that I may have been thinking about during the time. And how do I know? Because it's causing my heart rate to increase now thinking about it, right? And so what am I going to do with it? I'm going to assess in myself, is this rational? Does this make sense? Does this have legs? Is this a reasonable thought for me to think for myself? If it's not, I'm going to put it out of my mind and continue focusing my attention on the beach.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it does.
And so those are the most common practices. There are some more in-depth ones, and if people want to know more about it, come see me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Micah. And I'm following up on that. To make an appointment with the Greensboro College Counseling Center, email counseling@greensboro.edu or call 336-217-7224, extension 5224. And you can also stop by the Counseling Center's office Monday through Friday, 8:30 through 4:30 p.m. in main building office, room 3225, to make an appointment and speak with a counseling staff member.